Hi, I'm Minter Dial, and I'm director at My Dial based in London. I'm a speaker and multiple-time author, and I'm looking forward to sharing my experience on the role of empathy in business and artificial intelligence. Tune in to the end, and you'll learn all about how and why specifically to develop your empathy muscle as a leader, to consider how to encode empathy into, or should I say, humanize your AI. All that in order to help drive your business forward in a pragmatic and effective manner. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Talk to you soon.
You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. My guest today is Minter Dial. He's an international professional speaker, elevator, and multiple award-winning author. He's had a career of 16 years as a top executive at L'Oreal, where he was on the executive committee worldwide of the Professional Products Division. He wrote and produced a World War II documentary film for PBS, The Last Ring Home. He's authored 6 other business books, 3 of which are award-winning: Future Proof, You Lead, and Heartificial Empathy. So we may be focusing on the most recent one, Heartificial Empathy, putting heart into business and artificial intelligence. So we'll see where this goes. So welcome, Minter. Thanks for coming.
Hey, my pleasure, Rich. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Well, let's start with, artificial empathy. What does that mean? It's a play on words, like artificial empathy. Is this talking about making AI appear to have empathy and human qualities, or what's the basis of the book?
Well, it's started off I wrote the first version about 5 years ago, and it became apparent that we were looking at ways to use AI to help run business. But so often the AI was sort of automated and felt superficial. And it struck me that it would be useful to consider, if businesses are to use AI, how to make it more effective without, of course, being deceitful. And that's how it sort of began. And the second thing that caught my eye was that they were beginning to talk about things like AI therapists. And there was this rising crisis of mental health, and on the other side, a lack of sufficient therapists to meet the demand.
Yeah, I've heard there's a big lack of therapists right now. Yeah, it's really bad.
Exactly. And this is true actually in many countries, not just the US, but in Canada, the UK, France, Australia, at least where I have information and research. And so there were a bunch of people who were thinking about, well, why don't we just make some AI therapists? And that sort of looked like, well, a solution. But how was it going to happen? Who was behind it? What was the business model? And so I put my nose into all of that and really looked at ways and thought about ways that could be with some ethical oversight, with some knowledge or understanding of how to make it successful from a business standpoint, how to make AI more humane. And that opened up a whole Pandora's box. And I ended up meeting some incredible people working on this topic.
Okay, so what interesting things have you seen in terms of empathy coming from AI or more human-like interaction?
Right. So what I've seen is that it raises all sorts of eyebrows, provokes all sorts of reactions, and many people sort of rebuke it. Well, how can we possibly want to do that? I mean, it's really scary, making AI to be more sort of human. Maybe it's going to be more deceptive. It's just a machine, and it can't possibly feel feelings. And all of that is okay. I can hear all of that. Yet, what I discovered was that human beings sometimes are desperately lacking in empathy. There's all sorts of material that shows that college kids self-identify as having less empathy than the equivalent college kids from back in the 80s. And there's all sorts of notions about how in society, human beings, our society is less empathic. Part of that is, I think, a facet of not having enough time to be listening to other people. Part of it is a heightened form of narcissism where it's just all about me and I don't really give a rat's ass as to what anyone else is feeling or thinking. And then we've got the interruptions of the internet and digital. So there's a whole concoction of things that have made human beings not quite as available to listen.
Well, I'll give you a quick answer.
Into others.
Yeah, like with my I have teenagers, and I'll say to my son, "Hey, do you want XYZ?" And he'll say, "I'm good." And I'll say, "Why don't you say thanks, Dad? I appreciate it, but not right now." I'm good is just centered on you. It's selfish to say that,
Yeah.
And so I try to say that to him, but you're right. It's it's become I don't know. A lot of people are not very courteous, it seems.
Well, and we've got a divisive
or empathetic
environment in so many areas. And so in this context, the fact is that a machine has infinitely more time than human beings seem to spare to listen to other people. And at the heart of empathy is really understanding what the other person is thinking, feeling, or experiencing in terms of their context. So this is typically more about cognitive understanding. And the thing that a machine isn't able to do is actually feel the feelings. However, A, they're able to recognize the feelings, and 2, they have the time to lean in, ask questions, and they don't, if they're well programmed, won't circle back on you. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, Rich, but you're sitting at a dinner and hanging out with nice friends, and someone says, last night I had an accident. Oh, really? Well, what happened? Well, I ran into somebody. Oh, well, you tell me about that. The other day, they ran into me, and it got me so upset. And then they run on and tell you about their story 3 months ago.
They make it about them, everything.
Oh my gosh. And I mean, fine, stories beget stories, but can't you just stay with this one? The person had the accident last night, and we just fail to dial in to the situations of others. And I'm not saying you need to dial into everybody's situations. There are plenty of counterexamples where that works, or that shouldn't be the case. But the thing is, machines have, if you're well coded, have the ability to dial in and say, hey, so you had an accident last night? Tell me about it. What happened? Oh, that sounds like you must have, had a situation. You must have been upset. Did anyone get injured? I mean, and you follow into that story, that person's story, and you get a feeling of how what happened to them. And so
I can
the
tell
point
you
here
that
is that we go.
Oh, go ahead. Good. Sorry.
No, I was just saying we tend to hold AI up to a higher standard than we hold ourselves.
I think it's already happening a bit. Like in ChatGPT, I've asked it various things, and sometimes it was very complimentary in its response. It's like, that's a good question, and it deserves a thoughtful answer, and here's the answer. And I realized if AI gets this right, it'll be, unfortunately, like for a lot of people, a proxy for real relationships, because it'll never tire of giving empathy. It'll never try to really impose its own agenda on somebody. It'll be a very good listener. And I think people, if it's if you train them the right way, people unfortunately will love it.
Well, unfortunately, that characterization in today's world, the fact is that some people are just missing love, the idea of having a commitment for a long time. So I'm not quite as cynical, if you will, about what a machine can provide in terms of relationship. What I'm cynical about is why we criticize it when we don't actually do the hard work ourselves. And that's the real issue. We're very hypocritical about it. Whereas really, well, if you're upset about that or you don't like it, well, what are you going to do about it yourself, in your world, with your children, your friends, your colleagues, whatever? And that's sort of what stimulated me to write the book, was to make it a call to action for humanity to pick it up. I mean, in the context of the mental health story, the issue is a lot of people suffer from mental health. Yes, partly because we've got a heightened awareness that it exists. And, it was back in the days, it was stiff upper lip and we don't talk about these things. Yes, great. So we're talking about it. However, no one's really listening. And so as a society, we should be thinking, why is it that we have so much mental health disorder? everywhere, at home, at work, and so on. And then what are we going to do about it? And so I don't raise an eyebrow so high as to say that an AI, a therapeutic AI, can't provide an appropriate solution for a teenager who's in distress at 2 a.m. because who else is going to pick up the phone at 2 a.m.? I don't know about you, Rich, but I put my phone on silence mode when I go to sleep. However, it turns out that a lot of people suffer crises, and anxiety in the middle of the night. Who are you going to call?
Yeah, that's true. No, you're right. I think part of it is the personalization of everything and the availability of, smartphones for everybody. Everything's become, serving size, self-service, just kind of, this little unique package of amazing things just for you. That's what the smartphone seems like. So maybe that's what's made people more selfish and more self-absorbed, because they can be. They have their own little everything they need,
So I don't know. Well, I'm going to add a little bit more to this, Rich, because obviously it's a topic I've been talking about for a while. And one of the funny things is that people tend to criticize cell phones and mobile phones for everything that's happening and the heightened narcissism. Well, there was a book written about the age of narcissism in 1978, well before the cell phone came around. And there are many trends that are systemic that have caused our society not to wish to have the time to listen to others. I mean, there's sort of a socio-demographic element to this. There's the fact that both mother and father now have to work because that's just the way it works. And so who's there to listen to the kids? And kids are deprived of attention. They focus on getting hits and likes through the Instagrams of the world because that's the only thing that's available to them. And nowadays, people don't like the messiness of life. It's got to be convenient, fast, efficient, productive, all these types of terms that come from work. And the fact is that so many people prefer to break up with a text message rather than feel the heat and deal with the real issues and talk it through and be much more humane about the way
are there stats on that? Like the percentage of breakups that happen over text versus verbal?
Yeah, but I can't quote them, but I know that there are. I've something like over half of breakups, and I can't quote, unfortunately, the exact source, but maybe that's something I have to go and find for you afterwards. And by the way, having facts on the tips of your tongue, that's a lost art too, because everyone just sort of relies on your Googles of the world or your ChatGPTs. I happen to use Perplexity the most, but to get all the facts. But having facts, reading, remembering them, bringing them up in conversation on time, on cue, and being accurate about them and their sources, this is also a very lost art. And of course, the AI is extremely capable of doing that, of course, with hallucinations, but far more, if you program it well, and if you think about the idea of humanizing your AI, make sure to quote the source you use, double verify that the source is accurate, that the link works. You just tell the AI to do this. Well, we human beings say, I don't have time for that. And we'd rather spout off our feelings rather than the facts.
Well, I don't know. I can't help but feel that the news tells me what to do and what to think and what to feel. I thought that for decades. And I was thinking now, as you were talking about, the news saying there's misinformation and disinformation and all this crap. And I never heard that until, I don't know, maybe 5 to 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. And I think that that's also gotten into people's heads. So there's a lack of trust in any data too. And at the same time, right, people are just putting forth, stuff that could be speculation, true, not true, who knows? I guess it's the paradox of information availability. There's so much available that there's good and bad available, and then it becomes a new job now to sort through it, see what's right and what's not.
Indeed. You can, like any data scientist will tell you, you can make the numbers say what you want when you can manipulate numbers to say what you want, facts that are according to what your story is. But I think the idea of discussion with elements of facts is a lost art, and in lieu of bringing facts, and I mean, basically this is my criticism of postmodernism, as I'm sure you're aware of, where we would rather undercut and deconstruct everything that's been told in the past, because that's just a facet of the power of knowledge, and that then therefore programs everything that follows. So it is a tricky topic, but I think anyway, my point is make sure to bring facts into your conversation as opposed to what I feel, because sure, your feelings are wonderful and useful, but we shouldn't forget hard facts.
Yeah, I mean, another phenomenon, maybe I can contribute, maybe you've thought of this or not, but I don't use social media, but I'll go on YouTube and I'll, listen to videos. I don't watch them, I usually listen. But I guess my impatience causes me to listen to them at 1.25 or 1.5 speed. And I wondered in conversation if it's making me a lot more impatient listening to people, because I'm used to listening to stuff being sped up and they're not sped up. So I wonder if, how our technology is shaping us and shaping our ability to have empathy and all that as well. I'm not, again, you said people will blame cell phones, but it does contribute. I can feel like my attention is fragmented more than it used to be. And again, all this information or whatever you want to call it coming at you, it kind of blocks out other inputs you might get, let's say from face-to-face conversation. So I don't know. I think these things do contribute and they're shaping us big time.
I don't disagree. My way I look at this is I'd rather not blame the technology, because these are just tools. They're in our hands and we have the choice of whether we will or will not listen to 1.25. At times, Rich, I will actually I sometimes listen to the news at 0.9 and I breathe into it. I just relax, let it be, slow time. And as a part of my way of reframing, rewiring the way I work. And not that I'm a very keen person on time. And I think that there's a cultural element to this where certain societies and cultures are far more attentive to every second, and other cultures are a little bit more relaxed on, there's this famous term of Caribbean time or African time. But the fact is, time is rare and it's difficult. So I think I certainly don't mean to say we all should be listening to everybody all the time, but I do feel that we need to be more intentional about when we apply our listening ear to other people. So that might mean turning off notifications, and because we can do that, we have the power to just eliminate, like I say, like my telephone, I don't have any notifications come onto my telephone. So if I'm having conversation, I don't even need to address the beep, beep, something, someone sent me a text message. It's always off. And so I can always be on if I want to, or at least without the distractions. Afterwards, I have to then be focused on being present with you, Rich, in the moment, and then desire to listen to what you're saying and follow into what you are doing. And then, so that means to have time. And the issue is a lot of times we are very time constrained. I only have 20 minutes to talk with you. Well, for sure, when you have a constraint like that, then what that provokes means you're going to get to the topic right away, and you're going to put in your narrative right away because you don't know if you'll have time later to cover it, whatever your demand is. And there's no sort of sloppy, sort of messy, long chats. And the idea of sitting down with somebody a la Joe Rogan, not that I'm always listening to him, but it's interesting, this idea of having 3-4 hour conversations. There's an Indian guy called Amit Varma who does, I call him the Joe Rogan of India, and he has these 3-hour conversations, and by gum, they get into stuff. And it's fascinating the way they listen to one another. And we should have more role models like that, as opposed to screaming matches on televisions. No one's listening to anybody. And it's just about eyeballs, or
right, sound bites, eyeballs, crap. Yeah. Well, I know the like YouTube Shorts or Instagram Shorts or TikTok or things like that. Things have been carved up into shorter and shorter segments and sped up. And I remember my son showed me TikTok, and I'll probably sound like an old guy, but we watched this one video where someone was cooking something and it was sped up. And after like 20 seconds, I told him, son, I can't watch this. It's making me feel like my brain is scrambled. He's like, it's fine, Dad. I said, are all the videos of TikTok like this? He's like, no, but a lot of them are. I'm like, I couldn't watch this. It's awful. It was just, it's like watching movies nowadays. The trailers, they have all these cut scenes, or in the movie itself, there'll be all these cut scenes. It's just, everything is being chopped and turned into smaller and smaller fragments. And so it fragments people's minds. It feels like, because like mine is fragmented. I have to push against it all the time.
That's it. And we have to be aware.
So I guess, I guess what you're saying, without saying it, maybe I'm probably putting words in your mouth, but
Go for it.
Cultivate longer periods of time where you're talking to somebody, or if you're reading a book or whatever it may be, like deliberately push back against, the speed of everything and cultivate slowness or deliberateness in what you do.
Yeah, I give you an example, Rich, to be very concrete. Last night, my wife and I we were 10, so we were 8 people to come, most of whom didn't know each other. And we invited everybody with a theme. And the nature of the theme is that it's a little bit out of left field or out of zone of comfort. And the topic we talked about last night was, what is the single strongest facet of your identity that you have today, and what part of it might have faded over the past? What part of your identity might have faded over the past? Anyway, that was the theme, and everyone had to work on it. And of course, the conversation would occasionally break down into, splitting off into pairs and threesomes. But for the most part, we all listened to everybody. In other words, one person would have the floor. We have round table because that's best. And someone would speak and everybody listened. And it was just the comments that people had at the end was like, well, that's not so unusual. We don't do this anymore. And being able to be listened to be heard by strangers, it's a very compelling feeling. And as soon as you've had it, then you can generously give your time to listen to somebody else.
What did you notice from your guests? Were they happy? Were they exhilarated by the experience? Or did some of them have trouble doing it or paying attention? Like, what did you see?
Well, so I have to be very intentional as the sort of the master of ceremony of the evening to make sure that the quiet person doesn't sort of skulk away in an introverted corner, so that everybody has their time to talk about their response. And inevitably, if that's done in a way, well, there has to be enough psychological safety for people to feel that they can say what they really want to say. So one piece of this, how this works, is I always have to warm people up. I don't go plunging into deep, dark conversations right away. I have a method that I bring people in, and a little bit of levity, and then I ensure that the conversation is, or at least the person speaking is listened to. And inevitably, I mean, you can imagine you're married, or at least you have children, but at the next day we get messages from these people, and one person said, just from last night, he said, I wish we'd filmed it. It was so delicious. I'd like to live it again.
That's cool. Maybe you should do a weekly thing called like Shut Up and Listen or something. Invite different people.
Well, you know what I do, Rich, is I practice it in my daily life. I try to listen to people. I mean, of course, I'm a storyteller and I'm a speaker, so holy smokes, it's sort of the hypocrisy of it all. But I'm always trying to model that behavior, and it's wonderful. Here's another example, Rich. People listening will possibly relate to this. You go to a dinner and you're sitting. It's a seated dinner, and you go in and you're sitting at the seat, and you have these person to your right and person to your left, and start talking to them, and maybe get engrossed in a conversation with one of them. And it's happened to me numerous times. What I'll do is I'll just latch onto my neighbor and start asking them questions about their life, whatever they're doing. And I just follow them down. What they do, I make widgets. What sort of widgets? I help put widgets for cruise ships. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. Where do the widgets fit? And, you follow them down, right? At the end of the evening, it is not uncommon that the person would then, at the end, you are such an interesting person, they'll say to me.
Oh, because you're interested in them, yeah.
Yeah, they don't even know my name, much less who I am, what I do. And that goes to the complete paucity or lack of people who are prepared to listen. So anytime you listen, it's a huge gift to somebody else. And by the way, rather than wax on about myself, about what I do, because I know me, or at least I know everything I've done, how boring can it be to talk about me all the time? Far more interesting is to learn about someone else's experiences, their feelings and everything else, and you'll come out richer for it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've done over 4,000 interviews, and so my wife says to me sometimes, stop asking me questions. I'm not a podcast. So it can go too far. But I think I'm similar to you. Yeah, there's people I've had a conversation with, and they literally haven't asked me a single thing. I just keep asking them stuff hopefully in a nice way. But yeah, it's weird. And some people are verbose, some are terse, some are, I don't know. It just depends. There's all kinds I've seen from interviewing people. They're pretty easy to talk to, which is good.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
I'm not asking you any questions, so Rich, I could turn the tables very quickly.
Oh no, I'm sure you could. I try to make the focus about the guest, i.e. you, but which is what I was going to ask you next. So is the book prescriptive on what people can do to help themselves to, get more empathy into their lives, or what's the goal of the book for the reader?
Yeah, well, one part of it is forget the AI piece, but just think about empathy and when you can use it in your business, in your life, your spouse, your children, friends. While I wanted to have the hook of humanizing AI and raising people's eyebrows, the reality is the big picture is let's bring more empathy, targeted, intentional into our lives, into our daily lives, because it's an amazing tool and skill to have. Then the second piece is to think about AI in business and what are you doing with it, and to try to be meaningful about the business and the way you use AI. It's always been a big piece of everything I've written about is have more meaningfulness in our lives. And then the third piece is with regard to the mental health, and I have a whole chapter about that. And reality is, I think that as a society, we've become a lot weaker, meeker, and less resilient. And we're putting in place all sorts of ways to protect people, to make it safer, which on the face of it sounds better. But I posit in my book that we need to find a way to return to a little bit of hard knocks, a little bit more courage, and deal with harder situations face on. For example, don't text somebody you're breaking up. Go in and explain, to have the courage to explain to somebody, even if it's messy and it's going to take longer, to talk to people. We've lost the art of being more human in our conversation and exchanges. So it's a cry for being better people, but without being idealistic, because I'm far from idealistic. I am, I've been to see the Grateful Dead several hundred times, and I've done all sorts of things in my life. So I'm not a goody two-shoes person. However, I think that in knowledge of self, recognizing your own challenges and difficulties, we can become better people. And that's sort of what Heartificial Empathy version 2 or second edition really is all about.
Well, one quick question with the breakups: are these long-term relationships or these short ones? I mean, how could you break up with someone over text that you've been with for a year or more? I mean, that's crazy. That's like worse than ghosting.
Yep. I mean, all these other techniques that we have around our digital communications are pretty farcical. I mean, we'd rather have emojis than actually write out what we feel. And so we've superficialized a lot of our conversations. I wrote a book, Rich, that I didn't publish as a book, but I wrote it meaning to publish it as a book, but I wrote 3,000 words every Thursday. I published every Thursday at 5 p.m. on the Substack, how to revive the art of conversation. And within this is understanding the words you use that come out of your mouth, looking at how the person in front of you is speaking, not just the words coming out of their mouth, but their eyes, their expressions, hearing what's happening in their voice. These are eminently human qualities. And breaking up with a text, this has happened I have a story of a friend whose sister and one son with whom he'd been estranged, or they'd sort of said that they didn't want to have any more communication with them. And I mean, this is a guy who's my age, Rich, and he said, "Well, I sent my sister a message to try to get back to her." I was like, "What did you do? You sent a text message to get back and try to after 3 years? No. That's not how this." You just can't thinking that way. Anyway, I tried to steer him correctly.
So what do you, I know you've written before about the future. Is the current state of things at all what you thought it would be a few years ago? And where do you see things going?
Well, I'm writing a new book, Rich. And so this sort of informs everything I'm doing right now. And it's called The Avatar Trap. And it's about the way our society has been developing, and it's an attempt to try to rectify some of the accepted practices and norms that I think need to be revisited. So within that, I want to rehabilitate some older fashioned values, because I'm an old white dude, perhaps. But I also think that we've thrown out the baby with the bathwater in rejecting elements of the past. And so I want us to return to being able to have civil disagreement, have conversations that are rigorous, tough, and yet we can both learn from, as opposed to standing on my hill and shooting down and saying, you're wrong, I'm right, I'm good, you're bad, and come back into some kind of more growth mindset where we can all learn to listen to different people, different voices, and also be more realistic. I think the avatar trap also speaks a lot to how we've gotten lost as a society because we no longer wish to entertain reality. We'd rather the convenience, the likability, the superficiality of an Instagram post than the reality of my situation, where we have disease, we have illness, we have death, we have risk, we have loss, we have pain. And this is part of life. And the beauty of life is the ability to go through and the journey that isn't comfortable, isn't delicious and perfect. And rather than shun all these other negatives or imperfections, embrace them and move into reality, because the idea of exterminating death as if it's an illness is about as cockamamie as any society has ever been. I mean, the idea of immortality has been a topic of conversation for millennia. However, just because you can seek it doesn't mean you ought to try to be seeking immortality.
Do you think you understand how things have gotten to this point? Or is it, you feel like, you could speculate here, there, and everywhere, but you don't really know?
Well, I certainly would not wish to portray myself as an all-knowing individual. I do, the first section of my book is how we got here. And the reality is it began a long time ago. And little by little, things happened without necessarily being bad intentioned, but you move to another place because of what's happened before. And little by little, a little bit more sand, a little bit more issues, it just piles up. And we end up in this new situation that needs to be wound back, at least in some portions. You can't ever go back to normal or back to what we were. But I think if we could have a good conversation about, for example, the idea of freedom or the idea of progress, which are obviously two beautiful words. However, that isn't what it's all about. Being free, well, it comes at a price. I did my film about the Second World War, and the film and the book is about my grandfather who was killed as a officer and a prisoner of the Japanese. And freedom comes at a price. And right now, I don't think that we are paying heed to the price of freedom. It feels like an obvious thing: freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of action, freedom of belief. You can't be willy-nilly about this. And so I think we've got to this position through an awkward series of events that have happened over the last 60 years. That have been my life as well, as it turns out. And so I try to understand how we got to where we got to. It wasn't like I could point a finger and say, you are the silly people who made us get here. We're all where we are. And parents are trying to do what they can. Obviously, both of them are working and they love their children. Yet, should a child be encouraged to face risk and scuff their knee and maybe break an arm? Of course, we don't wish that on them, but we need to be creating an environment where they are brought up to live life as opposed to protected from anything that could be negative. So it's not very polite to say what I'm saying, but I think we need to re-engage with risk, pain, imperfection, and even death, and understand that it is part of life. And if I told you I followed the Grateful Dead, and the folk tale that began the name of the band was all about being aware of the notion of death. And as soon as you know that you die, you really integrate that thought. You are far more grateful for the life that you have and the breath that you're taking today.
That's true. Any, I don't know, besides exposing, what is and what people have become, it sounds like you're giving some ideas for people to be able to help themselves. And I don't see you packaging it into a course or a checklist or anything, but I don't know, what encouragement do you give to people to get back to this, more alive state of living? Go to host and hold dinners like you did, or like what else can people do? Just for some practical tips, let's say.
Yeah. Well, talk to a stranger. You're on the bus or on a plane. Hey, who are you? Listen to what they have to say and just dial into practice the art of empathy, because empathy is a muscle, and it takes some intentionality to start practicing it. So that's one idea. You can talk to a stranger. You could also talk to somebody you don't like. That's much harder to do. I know you and I have had some disagreements, but I'd like to sit down. Would you mind? Let's have a beer. We can talk. There's going to be suspicion. There'll be some who say, I don't want to do that with you because, but it's very difficult to talk to people that you have got issues with in the past. But if we don't learn how to do this, it's going to be awfully difficult. I mean, another one is, with your own family, oftentimes you come back from your day and, oh, how was your day? Oh, it was good. Oh, yeah, me too. Yeah, good. No. So get back into, try to carve out some time. Say, it was good. What happened that was good? Instead of saying, me too, it was good, and find time with people. There's a thing called close communication bias, Rich, where the people you're closest to, you end up creating a bias because you think you know what they're going to say. So how did it go today at work? Oh, it was a real pain in the ass. Oh, I can figure that. I'm sure it was a pain in the ass. It was Peter, right? And you cut off, you inject, you overlay all your thoughts. And the person who's actually trying to say, no, it wasn't about Peter. It was about Michael. And my situation is that he made me cry. But too often we kind of counterpunch into these stories, and we don't allow for that real revelation to happen. And close communication.
There's also the problem of, being a man and wanting to fix things. I'm sure you've had that conversation, like, don't try to fix it, just listen. And as a guy, I'm like, how could you just listen? You got to do something.
100%. I mean, the women are from Venus and men are from Mars. Or the book that actually preceded that was by a woman called Dr. Deborah Tannen. You just don't understand men and women in conversation. And that was actually the book that was foundational for me in this regard. But the other, Rich, to finish off on another element that's concrete, or at least specific, is to take the time to find out more about who you really are. And the wake-up call here is that basically most of us go around thinking that we know who we are when we only really have an understanding of 80%, maybe even less, of who we are. And the final 20% we prefer not to talk about. And that's going to be things like happened in my childhood, or things I'm not proud about, or parts of me I don't like. And we shovel them down. And what the problem is with that is that they end up like a chip on the shoulder, reappearing in the middle of an unexpected moment. And this is how you end up with these shit for bosses who haven't done that work, and it comes out of them in moments of stress, or just naturally because they haven't done the work of really getting to know who they are. And in this knowledge, the hardest part of it is to come to grips with and accept the things that are less perfect. And one of those will include your mortality, but without getting woo-woo, at least figure out what are your imperfections, what are the things you're not proud about, how could they be crowding or impacting who you are as an individual. And afterwards, I'm not saying come clean and tell everybody that you are an axe murderer. However, at least recognize it within you and then start doing that work. And for that, the advice is carve out the time and be intentional. And if you need help, find somebody, a coach or a close friend with whom you can talk about it. It's not something that happens overnight. For me, I did this work starting when I was 37 years old. And it took me about 2 years to come to grips with pieces of me and my past, and ended up with a statement that was the person into whom I wanted to live. In other words, be this person in light of who I was, but not because I was overloaded with my baggage. I just took stock of my past, and I created with intentionality this idea of who I wanted to be, created my own little personal mission statement, and then have ever since been living into that, which doesn't mean that life is perfect or that I am perfect, but it's such an energy boost to know why I'm on this planet.
Well, that's really cool. Would you mind sharing what you've decided your mission is on this planet?
I will gladly do so. And frankly, the funny thing is I got a coach when I was 37, a guy called Clément, and French is my first language. And I asked Clément, and we did this work together. And I ended up with the first statement being French. And then I translated it into English. And over the years, I've made minor tweaks to it, and that's okay. It should not be statutory or some sort of institutional piece. But basically mine is this, Rich: to elegantly elevate the debate by connecting dots, people, and ideas for a more meaningful existence.
Okay. And that's what you did with the dinner, which is very cool.
Exactly.
So are you going to make this a regular thing, by the way? It could be a lab, I guess, a psychology lab where you try different things, not in a bad way, but to see how people react.
I want it to be an experience as opposed to an experiment. But I've been doing this, my wife and I, since our time in New York back in the 90s. And so we've done, I can't exactly count, but something between 200 and 300 of these dinner parties. We do one about once a month. And we especially look for the people who we're going to invite. We want them to be meeting new people. So it's not just like the regular gang. We're always, so last night we had a couple in the 30s, and we also had a couple that were over their 80s. And so intergenerational, different cultures. And anyway, so we've been doing this, and it's a glorious thing to do. It's only one night a month, but it does last a while because well, first of all, it takes time to prepare the meal, think about who you're going to go. So it occupies a piece of our time. And then afterwards, I'm always keen to hear what people thought and hope that these people who didn't know themselves the night before coming, want to get in touch with, I heard you say that. Let's go and have coffee. Let's go have tea. Let's have a beer. So begetting those types of new relationships is highly energizing for myself and my wife. So we keep on doing that. And then, as I say, I've been doing podcasting for 15 years and I haven't had as many as you, Rich. I have to say that is one heck of a lot more than I've done.
I went crazy with it for a while. It was just like drinking from a fire hose of information.
And how was that for you, Rich?
It was exhilarating for a long time. It was overwhelming, but it was just, I'd see articles about something and you only get the surface layer. So I would have my scheduler contact that person and, try to get them for an interview. I mean, I could talk to you for a long time on this. It'd probably be a whole thing if you wanted. But yeah, it was a great experience. I've made a lot of friends through it. I've found products and advice and all that's improved my life a lot. Like I love it. I went into it with no idea on where it would go, and it's taken me all kinds of places. So I really enjoyed it, and I continue doing it. Not at the pace I did before.
Sounds like trust the process.
Yeah, in this case, I decided, let's just see what happens. Yeah, I don't do that with everything, but with this I did. And I figured, what's it going to hurt me to talk to people and learn stuff? So
hurt you to learn stuff.
Yeah, I figured, why not?
There are two things that I talk a lot about when I'm doing my work with clients. And one of them is capped curiosity. Make sure to have curiosity, because it's one of the two things that children always have. But be aware of the infinite rabbit hole that information can be. And so be more intentional about what you're curious about. And then the second thing is to play, to remember to play. Inject pieces of moments of play in your life. So whether that's getting the old guitar out and strumming some songs, singing at the top of your voice in your shower, getting on the ground playing Lego with your kids, or goofing around a little bit. Play is a gorgeous facet of our lives. And I think it's absolutely essential to have play in your couple. It's obviously important as a child, but I also think it's a wonderful thing to have in the workspace, which doesn't necessarily mean, roughhousing or playing nasty jokes on people. But find ways to inject more playfulness in your work, and you'll find that you'll develop greater trust in one another because you're allowing yourselves to move into a little bit more of a childlike, wonder-like zone. And that in a world where we're all about efficiencies and productivity, it's good to have a little play. I mean, I've probably taken psychedelics, I don't know, 300 or 400 times in my life. So I can say I've played. I continue to play. I continue to have fun. And by the way, it's one of the 7 things I'm resolving to promote as part of a solution pack, if you will, for the avatar trap, is to invite people to think about psychedelics as a way to make well people better, not just the pathology of depression or anxiety or fear of death or whatever else the doctors are coming up with, but just for us to think about rewiring a brain, think about how little we are and unimportant in this whole world. We all are. and then relishing that unimportance and then putting perspective on what we think is important, and then living life in a more intentional, maybe circumscribed part where you're not trying to fix the entire world and promoting how good you are on Instagram to the rest of the world, but within your mind, within your community, be a better person.
Very good. Well, Minter, we're out of time, unfortunately. It's great fun talking to you. What do you want to give to people that are listening so they can follow up? Meaning, should they now go get your newest book, or if they have an interest in what you're saying? Hopefully they do. Where can they go to find more about you and see your writings and learn your thoughts?
So I have this weird name, Minter Dial, and that makes me very Google friendly. So my site is minterdial.com. I have a French one and .ifr and podcasts and material. So if someone's curious and they actually are going to put down the earphones and go type out it, go for it. The thing that I'd like to leave with maybe is that I've been doing a project is matching my passion, a long-term passion, with my business acumen. So I've been playing a sport called paddle tennis. Don't know if you've ever come across it, but it's different from, or in America, they call it padel. It's different from pickleball. It's different from platform paddle tennis or hot California tennis. Okay. It's a sport that is played in a glass 20 by 10 meter container and is taking off everywhere around the world. Anyway, what I've been doing is I've been taking out executive teams and I've been having them explore, meet, sweat, laugh, cry, and have fun on a paddle court. And then I use the experience, the lived experience on the paddle court to develop new ideas, counterintuitive ways to improve the business. So I call it the joy of paddle for business. And I did a session in Miami a couple of weeks ago. And by gum, I got an NPS rating. They actually did NPS 8.6 for my session. So what I'm trying to do is use play, sports, health, and all the while thinking about how to make business a stronger, better, more missionary type of experience. And I think that's
very cool.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to leave with, the joy of paddle for business. That's thejoyofpaddle.com.
Okay. Well, Minter, thanks so much for coming. It's been a great time speaking with you, and keep doing what you're doing. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rich. Well, of course, this was not on video, but you didn't get to see I finished an entire 1664. That's a French beer.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.